Good morning. I'm John Henry for Frain Industries, and we're here with a Tronics front and back labeler from their rental fleet. And we're going to walk you through how a pressure-sensitive labeler works, the various components, and how we get from an unlabeled can to a labeled oil can. So the first thing to do is get the bottles onto the conveyor. This is usually from an upstream machine. In the case of an F-style bottle, they all need to be oriented the same way. And we're going to turn on the conveyor. And the first thing that we have to do is make sure that we get the bottles adequately separated so that the labels don't overlap, so that there is a space between the bottles as they go through the labeling process. Now, the maximum space usually is not important in this particular instance. The minimum space is. We'll want an inch or two between each bottle. So we use a spacer wheel to achieve that. On other systems, we might use a timing screw or another mechanism to get the spacing. And the spacer wheel is just a wheel that's going to rub up against the bottles. And I turn it on. And you can see how it holds the bottles back and provides the separation. The bottles come through the spacer wheel, and on this particular machine, the next step is the aligning chain. The aligning chain is not strictly necessary on this machine because this is usually used on an oval bottle or an odd-shaped bottle to get it perfectly straight and aligned as it goes through the machine. On an oval bottle, if it's twisted slightly, the labels will go on the bottle, but they will be in the wrong position. One label will be too far to the front of the bottle, the other label will be too far to the back of the bottle. So we use the aligning chains. If this was a dedicated machine for this type of bottle, these aligning chains probably would not be here. These are used mainly for oval and other hard to orient bottles. After the bottles come through the aligning chain, they're captured by a top hold-down belt. This belt is going to be moving at the same speed as the product conveyor, and the purpose of this belt is to keep the bottle straight and keep the bottle from getting pushed out of position by the labeling head as the label gets applied. It's important that the top hold-down belt run at exactly the same speed as the product conveyor. And here you can see the bottle coming through past the labeling heads, discharging at the end of the conveyor. I have raised the top hold-down belt for purposes of illustration. As the bottle exits the timing chain, it's going to pass the photo eye. The photo eye is going to see the leading edge of the bottle is going to start a timer, and as the bottle travels on to the labeling head, to the peeler plate, the timer is timing so that when the bottle is in the correct position relative to the peeler plate, the label starts dispensing. The label will be dispensed out onto the bottle. These brushes will wipe the labels down, and the bottle will continue to the discharge. On this machine, because it's designed to be as generic as possible, there's also a wrap station and a backing plate. This would be for a round bottle. It's not used on this particular F-style oil bottle. So now I've turned the labeling heads on, I've turned the conveyor, the aligning chain, the top hold down on. We're going to run a bottle through and actually put a label on the bottle. So here comes the bottle through the aligning chain, picked up by the overhead conveyor, top hold down, and as it passes the labeling head, a label is dispensed and applied to the bottle. So you can see that this label is slightly out of position. It's pretty well straight, but it's a little bit to the back. Now this could be because of bottle handling, or it could be because of a label dispensing issue. If the label head is dispensing erratically, you can get this. So it's an easy thing to determine where the problem is: labeling head, bottle handling, timing. We're going to take this bottle and we're going to run it through again. And we put a second label on, and you can see the second label, but it's pretty close. So this tells me that it's a timing issue, not an issue with the labeling head being erratic, not a problem with the bottle itself being out of position. So it's easy to fix just by adjusting the timing. Yeah, on this I have adjusted the label application position, or the timing delay from the photo eye, and you can see this was the original label, this was the next label that I put on after the first adjustment. I adjusted it a bit more and I adjusted it a bit too much. So I'm going to go back, I'm going to take a little bit of timing out of it, and we'll move the label back this way a tad, and we should be having it perfectly centered. Now looking at the top label, you can see that I have moved it back about 1/16 of an inch, and it now looks like it's pretty well centered in the bottle. Now you notice that I'm not using fresh bottles. I'm putting the labels one on top of the other, because if I used a fresh bottle, it might be hard to see how much I've moved it. So this gives me an indication of the movement. So now let's try a fresh bottle and see if the label looks like it's in position. So now you see a fresh bottle, fresh label, and the label looks pretty well centered. We should probably have a label gauge to determine if it's exactly centered, but to the eye, it looks pretty good. On this machine, the label position is controlled electronically, and there's a digital readout. There's an up and down button that allows you to adjust the time delay, which is what controls the label position. The other factor controlling label position is the position of the photo eye. If the photo eye is moved, the label position will move, because the labeler is timing based on the time between when the photo eye sees the bottle, a delay, and when the label is dispensed. If this photo eye is moved, even though the digital indicator says that we're in the correct timing, the label position will not be correct. These photo eyes should always be permanently fixed. Do not use hand levers, do not use hand knobs, because if you do, they will be adjusted, and then the electronic adjustment will be out of calibration. It will take more time to set up. We currently have the labeler set up with a conveyor speed of 11.4. If we want to increase the speed, on some older labelers, if you increase the conveyor speed, you have to increase the speed of everything else. You have to manually adjust either the position of the photo eye or the timing of the label dispensing. This machine has a PLC and servo motors where everything is feeding back, so everything stays synchronized regardless of what you change with the conveyor speed or machine speed. So I'm going to increase the machine speed fairly dramatically. This is very nice with the digital readouts, so you can always get back to exactly the same point regardless of who's setting up the machine. We've increased the speed from 11.4 to 14. We're going to run the bottle through, and if everything stayed synchronized, the next label should be directly on top of the previous labels. And as you can see, the labels are directly on top of each other. So we did increase everything perfectly, nothing changed.